Hey, this is Dr. John Gazer, Rock River Laboratory, Nutrition Director, Tech Services, also an adjunct professor with the University of Wisconsin, Dairy Science Department, where I've collaborated with my colleagues, Professor Randy Shaver, Professor Joe Lauer, and Professor Bruce Jones, in introducing and publishing, now available through Professor Lauer's website, corn.agronomy.wisc.edu, a decision support tool geared toward helping dairy forage growers evaluating seed corn choices for their farms through a cash flow projection. Over the next 15 to 20 minutes, I will introduce the tool, walk through the key inputs. However, before getting into that, I'd like to introduce the overall objective. The tool is not an endorsement of any specific seed corn or management style. Rather, our aim with this approach has been to identify the necessary inputs for, in our view, an appropriate partial budget and cash flow projection on a case-by-case basis. Every dairy will be different, thus we advise you to work with your nutritionist, your seed and crop consultant, or agronomist in identifying the best inputs you can, and I'll walk you through what those inputs are. Within the tool, we separate milk revenue per cow on an income standpoint from and balance against feed costs per cow. Feed costs are divided into corn silage and non-corn silage feed costs. We identified that we needed to do so to appropriately value and account for corn silage feed costs derived from corn silage total production costs. I will identify that I won't go through these in detail today, but we do have considerably more support information in the event that there are a number of calculations nested behind the spreadsheet. If you would like further detail behind how we arrived at some of the calculations, we have all these transparently identified here. I will not be going through these in particular, but I will highlight that this exists, and please contact me at jgazer@wisc.edu if you'd like support. I know Professor Lauer also welcomes contact for support here as well, and I can provide you these documents. In setting up this tool, I will show you where we can get access to it. So I mentioned before, corn.agronomy.wisc.edu is Joe's webpage. And then I will point you to the season tab here, and then invite you to click on calculators. When we do so, the decision support tool geared toward seed corn evaluation is the top one. Currently, corn, BMR, silage, milk yield, milk versus yield calculator. If we click this link, it will initiate an Excel download, which will go into your downloads folder or wherever you have your web browser pointing to download your files. I've chosen to utilize Google Sheets software to evaluate and introduce the tool today. It's just my personal preference. But when you open the tool, it will likely open in Excel. Within the tool, we have income derived from production on the left-hand side here and all the inputs associated. Then on the right-hand side of the tool, we have corn silage production costs and associated feed costs derived from those on the right-hand side to effectively put together our partial budget. In the tool that you will download, there will be a couple text or dialog boxes that are indicated with arrows that point us to where the information for the example or that you download, where this information was derived from. The tool is meant to be customizable, or the user should be inputting data for your specific farm and situation or projections in any cell that is coded with blue. So here, for example, we have a 500 cow dairy scenario. However, this can be changed from 100 cows to several thousand cows. Please enter your information here. And then we have side-by-sides for evaluation. Here we've got conventional seed corn evaluated against BMR seed corn. The production information and intakes, this is all derived from a published paper. Again, the reference is going to be dictated here in this dialog box, but I've got the Journal of Dairy Science paper open here. Professor Shaver and Fredo's meta-analysis, effects of whole plant corn silage, etc., evaluated through meta-analysis, published in the Journal of Dairy Science. The information corresponding to the spreadsheet tool example that we have, or for a starting point, corresponds to Table 3 on page 2666 of this published paper, where we adapted and converted from metric units to English units, conventional and BMR, production, intakes, milk fat percentage, milk protein percentage. So you'll recognize that those are in synchrony. The dry matter intake is fixed within the tool, recognizing that there was no difference in feed conversion from Luis's meta-analysis. This can be altered though by the user by changing the value here in the BMR dry matter intake toggle. If this value is entered into a greater than 100%, let's say we bump it up to 102.5 or 103, that will increase BMR dry matter intake relative to production, effectively decreasing feed conversion efficiency. Whereas if we have reason to believe there will be an increase in feed conversion efficiency, we can actually set this to a value less than 100, and that will drop the dry matter intake relative to production, increasing feed conversion efficiency, which you can see here. I'm going to leave this for demonstration purposes set at 100. Another important input is to put in current and relevant revenue values per pound of fat, protein, other solids, and premium. This data can be accessed with a simple Google search, and I invite you to search for Class 3 milk price announcement. That will then yield or give us a link to this document here where we have the announcement of class and component prices. Here doing this demonstration in April, we have the most current March data. So you can input that given the component announcements when you're running this. And then one of the most influential points in the spreadsheet, and where I suggest you sit down and work with your nutritionist, or if you are a nutritionist, spend some time in coming up with these, because we had to separate corn silage from non-corn silage feed costs. These two cells here correspond to non-corn silage TMR cost density and dollars per pound. I've got a table open here on the last tab where I can demonstrate how we would arrive at such. So a commonly understood value may be the cost of the feed on a per pound of TMR basis. So an average for a dairy may be 10 to 11 cents cost per pound of TMR. The way we arrive at that is by balancing feed costs of all the respective ingredients, coming up with a total feed cost. Here in this scenario, it's $5.82 per cow per day. Dividing that by total pounds of dry matter intake of 55, that's 10 cents. Now, this is not, though, the parameter we want to input in the spreadsheet. Rather, we will need to zero out the corn silage costs, either with your nutritionist, or determine this, then determine the total non-corn silage costs of all other ingredients, and then balance that against, or rather divide that by the total non-corn silage dry matter intake. So here in this case, with this scenario, we've got $5.07 in non-corn silage feed costs divided by 40 pounds of non-corn silage dry matter intake to arrive at our 12.7 cents per pound of non-corn silage TMR. So we would enter that number in here. The spreadsheet is seeded with 14 cents per pound of non-corn silage cost density. The reason it is equivalent in these cases, in all of the research situations that were set up to evaluate the impact of corn silage alone, the diets were not changed. Thus, the cost densities were not any different. The researchers simply set out to replace one corn silage with another corn silage that stemmed from a different seed going in the ground. However, you can change this if you believe that you can put potentially a cheaper diet together for one or the other scenario. These can be altered. Then the spreadsheet will calculate total milk revenue depending on the milk production up above, and then calculating the pounds of fat, protein, and other solids produced to then be multiplied against the revenue on a dollars per pound basis to determine milk revenue per cow per day as an income. Then on the right-hand side of the ledger, again, you'll see all the blue cells where we can enter information. The spreadsheet and tool is set up to input the percent of corn silage in the TMR on a dry matter basis. So this may be a little bit different than you are used to looking at your corn silage or your forage amounts. However, the 35% is a starting point, and this stems again back from the meta-analysis. On average, there was about 35% corn silage of the diet relative to all the other ingredients. This can be changed if we wanted to, for example, increase the forage with one seed choice versus the other. We can do that, and you can see the resulting impact. But again, for demonstration purposes, I'm going to leave the spreadsheet with the seeded information. Then we have a starting point of 25 ton, and this is a 35% ton here, and this would be an average value for the upper Midwest, but this can be changed. Then the ratio of, or rather the tonnage calculation of BMR is determined via a yield drag that is dictated right here. So Professor Lauer has assessed in historic trials and hybrid trials and plots that when managed similarly to conventional, he's observed in the neighborhood of 15% yield drag relative to conventional. Now this may be lesser based on your experience and your management conditions are greater. You're free to change this as you see fit. So for example, we may say 10, we may say 8, and that'll, you can see, change the parameters. However, we'll leave this at 15. We can also enter storage dry matter losses and feed bunk refusals if we believe there's an interaction relative to either of these seed corn decisions, but I'm not going to enter that or change that information. Then what the tool does a nice job of identifying is the total acres needed to feed the herd, and this may be something that we haven't completely understood with prior approaches to looking at partial budgets, but one thing that we've highlighted here. So in this situation with the yields and the associated yield drag, we've got 226 or 7 versus 277 acres needed to feed this herd with these feed losses for a year. And then equivalent probably to the yield drag as to a really influential point within the tool to go along with the non-corn silage cost densities. The total corn silage production costs per acre are pretty important to input. I've found that not many folks know these true costs for their given farms, but that's likely a learning opportunity, or if you know these costs, kudos to your team for knowing exactly what your costs are per acre. We arrived at $800 per acre by referencing the Iowa State University's extension tool that's acknowledged here. I've got this tool open on another tab to work through. So this is a nice extension piece, updated annually estimated costs of crop production in Iowa. This is a nice starting point for us to work from. We can either use this information, or where I'd rather see us go, and I would suggest you input your true production costs or variable costs per acre to determine your true cost per acre, and then the tool will calculate cost per ton. We arrived at 800 because you can see between 21 and 26 tons per acre at 35 dry matter, and average costs for various inputs, seed, fertilizer, crop protection, and then harvesting costs. Iowa State extension folks estimated between $780 and $930 per acre in total costs. So we seeded this with an $800 value, and then we've set a differential price of $800 versus $850 based on potentially increases in crop protection, increases in seed costs. If we understand a bag of seed corn will be spread across roughly 2.5 acres. If we had, for example, a $50 increase in seed costs, we would divide that by 2.5, and then that would be the increase in crop production costs per acre. Or if we had seed costs to go along with potentially, and one thing that I often hear recommended is to apply additional crop protection with a BMR versus a conventional silage, that can be accounted for here. This is simply a starting point, so you're free to change these as you see fit. But based upon these crop production costs per acre and associated yields, then we have a true cost per ton highlighted within the spreadsheet. Then with our cost per ton in hand and our total yields in hand and acreages in hand, we do a better job highlighting the total corn silage production costs for the herd. Here, for this example, we've got $180,000 versus just shy of $240,000 in total corn silage costs. This can be thought of as feed costs, to be then also added to the non-corn silage cost density multiplied against dry matter intake, herd size, and 365 days a year, to be balanced then against milk production revenue. The spreadsheet does these calculations for us behind the scenes so that we aren't burdened necessarily with all the details. But again, if you'd like the details, I've got those acknowledged on that associated slide deck, which I'd be happy to share with you. But for this situation, we then have income over feed costs determined as such for the two scenarios. Where we want to focus our attention, though, on the spreadsheet are in the rows here highlighted by this window, where we've got a net loss in this situation of around $31,000 for the herd, or on a per cow basis for a given year, net loss of about $63 per cow. This again is no endorsement or meant to portray anything about these two seed corn choices. Rather, our aim with this tool has been to highlight all of the inputs that need to be considered when working through this with your management and advisory team. One other thing, I guess, or a couple other options that I would foresee this tool having utility would be to evaluate different seed corn choices, maybe not BMR versus conventional, but if and I'm an advocate of dairies and feedlots putting in their own corn silage plots and programs to go along with University of Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan State's PDMP, the first trials. I know they're Cornell, a lot of different groups out there that are running hybrid trials, but I'm an advocate of dairies and forage growers also running plots in your fields with your management scenarios, looking at somewhere between 5 and 10 plots, and then doing nutritional analyses to go along with yield estimates. If we have that information in hand, we could also plug some of that in here or work with our nutritionist to run projections on what, say, seed corn A versus seed corn B grown in the same year may look like from a cash flow standpoint. I will advise against comparing seed corn grown in different years, because the impact of management and more so growing environment can completely wash out any differences in genetics. I often will think about roughly 50-50 explanation of variance between genetics versus growing environment and management. Lastly, in the absence of any plot information, or if you are working with your nutritionist and would like to just get a starting point, the data we've referenced here is from a published research paper, and it dates back a few years. Rock River Laboratory has also written a BMR versus non-BMR support piece, and I will point this out. If you'd like a copy of this, and this could help you along in your projections, please contact me at John Gazer at rockriverlab.com. That is JohnGoeser at rockriverlab.com, and I'll happily provide you a copy of this, or you can contact any of my other Rock River Laboratory colleagues to use this in projection situations. But what this represents are an average nutritional report for corn silages submitted to Rock River Laboratory the last few years, labeled as BMR, or those that were not labeled as BMR. We were able to ping against our database. Jacob Carlin actually did a nice job. We portray the data in population distributions so that we can see differences depending on how the samples were labeled. So for example, greater NDF digestibility at 30 hours for samples that were labeled as BMR versus not BMR. But where I would work toward in running diet projections for use within the seed corn evaluation partial budget tool, cash flow projection tool, would be to potentially pluck some data from a table on page 2, where we may have dry matter, NDF, fiber digestibilities, starch digestibility. So your nutritionist can pull this information into a ration formulation tool to do some projections in terms of milk. So with that, I hope I've done a reasonable job in explaining the overall objective. Again, the aim here was to highlight all of the inputs that should be considered in running an appropriate cash flow projection, and then also giving you an idea as to where you can find additional resources to go along with this. Again, Joe Lauer and I welcome contact for further support. Please send your suggestions to us as to how we could make this tool better, because our aim is to put something in your hands that can help you make decisions, but we recognize that we're not perfect, so we will continue to strive on making this tool better into the future. If there's interest, we will update and provide additional iterations of this down the line. So thank you for taking time to work through this with me, and we hope that you have been able to pull some value from it.